meditation or uttaseta or whatever you want to call it from different traditions is a big part of it for me. But that's not my main one, I would say. And you all know what my main one is, of course. It's not even blatantly obvious from the beginning and whatnot. My spiritual practice is the reading of the various different texts, going and deeply studying them at such a level that I'm trying to understand myself and the world around me, and making it so that way I align myself with the facts that are presented to me, and I can consistently change my worldview as new understandings unfold within me and insights that come from it. And it's a type of spiritual purification of eradicating anything that should not be there, anything that is not based upon reality.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Uzlaga Saga. Today, we have our special guest and cast member, Nathaniel. I'm probably going to ruin your last name. Heutmaker?
Close enough.
Close enough. Awesome. So, Nathaniel, pretty much just tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll get into it from there and question as we go, I guess.
So I guess I'll start at the beginning and whatnot, which is that to answer the question of how I got on this path, I was born into it directly. All right. This is not an exaggeration by any stretch of the imagination at all. It is where I can say that definitively. Now, it wasn't for the Nordic side of things, or the Germanic, if you want to use that term instead, or heathen, whatever. It was for a sister religion that's still a living tradition even to this day. Mainly the Vedic tradition within Hinduism and that kind of stuff, which has a direct link to that. My mother is still a practitioner of that and follower of that even to this day. I was brought up in that particular tradition. I've gone through various different rites and rituals that were all of that growing up, starting from literally before I can even remember being months old and going through certain things with it all the way up until, I was an adult. And on the other side of things with it is that, I grew up in a household that also had atheism/agnosticism. For that on my grandparents' side, my grandparents on my father's side. And then on my grandparents on my mother's side, I had Catholicism and Protestantism. So I grew up in a very diversified household in terms of the general understanding of various different worldviews, which I think is what allows me to be able to flip between any of them at any given point very easily and understand them all. Is the point that I'm bringing up, and be able to deep dive it and really get into that for what's happening. So that's where my origin story begins, so to speak, with that. I didn't have to end up going through the three phases that Thor kind of tells you about, at least in the same sense that most people talk about for what it is. It was just something that was innate into me and whatnot. To be clear about my own spiritual view and whatnot, I don't consider myself to be a heathen. I don't consider myself to be any part of any particular religion or tradition in any way, shape, or form. I do consider myself to be a very spiritual individual, and that is very important to me, but I don't put a label on it. Instead, what I do is I research as many different traditions as I can and go and experience them directly when I can as well, and take part in the various different rites and rituals and make it so that way what happens on that end for me is I try to find the core central truth that underlines all of them. And that makes it so it's true for all of humanity in all times and all places. I think it's universally true is the point. That is what my core religion or tradition is, so to speak, on that particular front with it. That's how I view things.
I like that. That actually kind of resonates a bit with, mine, aside from the being born into it directly as the way you were. But yeah, I at times kind of have trouble saying exactly what I practice because of such a wide variety of interests, we'll say, or studies. But okay, that's a good little introduction. Anybody have any questions to start with to go from there?
Yeah.
Or
So when like you were faced with all these different cultures and religions and aspects on spirituality, did you ever like experience any type of identity crisis
No.
among them?
No, I was only interested in finding out the truth. I do remember, asking about God and getting different various takes and points of views on things, which actually allowed me, even as a child, where one side said one thing, another group said something else, and then my mom would say something different and all of that, making it ultimately so that way I knew I was going to have to figure it out for myself and that I wasn't going to be able to find the answers from anybody that was a authority figure, let's say, at what point. Because again, when I'm asking these questions, I'm 6, 7, 8 years old, and that kind of thing for it. And it became not necessarily clear right then that that would be the case for it. I'm still a kid, but it made it to that way a little later on, but before I hit teenage years, that it's like, I'm going to have to figure this out on my own. I'm not going to have somebody that's going to hand it to me on that particular front. Hence why I said I didn't even have to go through the 3 different phases for it. It was kind of forced on to me to begin with, to being like, you are skipping all this other stuff. Yeah, you've gone into where you're growing up with these stories, you're growing up with this particular worldview or these other worldviews that are influencing you and whatnot, but none of them made any sense to me. I do remember at some point in my teenage years, I went from considering myself to be Vedic/Hindu and whatnot to Buddhist, mainly because Buddhism doesn't even mention God one way or another, with the exception of a handful of texts. But even then, it's not saying whether God exists or not. It's just showing the arguments for and against it and why they're all ridiculous according to tradition and whatnot. And then later on, as I grew up even further and became into my 20s and that kind of stuff, became clear that like there is no one tradition that holds universal truth. That's just not a thing for what's going on there. And it's important to note that that's the case for what's happening with that. It doesn't matter what the tradition is. They all pull from things that come before them that are much older, that have survived to this day, and whatnot. Even like Vedism, which, we can trace back at minimum in terms of its written text to 3,500 years ago, maybe even 4,000 years ago now. For stuff with it. Obviously, there's stuff that comes back way, way older than any of that stuff or what's happening. The Venus figurines are a prime example of this. So most people, they know them as the Earth Mother and whatnot. They're found in mainly Europe and Asia and parts of Northern Africa and that kind of stuff with it. It used to be that people thought that they were only 30 to 40,000 years old. Now they keep pushing that back about 30 years ago, 3 decades ago. They had where they found one in Morocco that was 3,500. That was 350,000 years old, which means it predate our species even on that particular front. And then they found another one in what we know today as Turkey that goes to 800,000 years ago. And I forget where this last one that they found is, but they found another one within the last 3 or 4 years that they've dated, maybe 5 years that they've dated to 3 million years ago. So when we say that we have, we say Mother Nature in English and whatnot for that, that's a kernel of that particular idea going back 3 million years ago and predates our species even. So the concepts that I'm talking about, some of them are so old that we don't know definitively who came it up, and they're not even from our own direct species, at least according to modern archaeology and understanding of things, or looking at the past and whatnot. So some of the ideas that we have that have been passed on for so long, they're not even human necessarily for where they come from, for what it is. They're hominid, but they're not necessarily human. Those are the distinction there.
right, well, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say a follow up to my question. Have you ever read the book Life of Pi?
I have when I was in high school.
Yeah. I was going to say it's interesting because in that book, the individual like associated himself with 3 different religions.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
And I think it was Hindu, Buddhist, and Christian. And I don't know. I think it's interesting. So when you're looking at all these collective concepts together, you say you're looking for the truth. What appears to be the truth? What is that to you?
Many cultures have called it many different things. They've called it natural law. They've called it karmic law. They've called it was laga. and whatnot, even for primordial law, for this particular stuff with what's going on here. It's called the law of consequentialism. In other words, cause and effect for what's going on there. There's been so many different things that it's called. It doesn't matter. It's all the same strands. And in Christianity, it's, you reap what you sow type idea and whatnot. There's all these laws that are there with it, but none of these laws that are that affect us in any way, shape, or form are necessarily human, so to speak. So an example of this that clearly has nothing to do with what we want one way or another would be, you can't have a society that's based around the idea that murdering everybody is good. It's not going to work. You can logically think that through. It will destroy itself. It's anti-life. That's what happens on that particular front. So in other words, the whole point of looking for this particular truth and whatnot is to find what is universally true. If you use this car key here as an example for what's going on here, and you look at different civilizations over here, they're all lined up, and you look at all the different time periods that go through it here. What you can do in that particular instance is that you can say, all right, this makes it so way over here, we have this key. And we see that this key is, every time that this key is here, civilization thrives. So again, it goes through it all the time periods. We know this is something that's very important for what's going on. Universally true if it's there in every single one of them. But somehow, let's say it disappears. And then every time that it disappears, you notice that that particular thing, civilization starts having problems or collapses or whatever the deal is with it. Aha! You've now discovered something that's that way with it. You can also do the exact same process for going through with the key and looking every time there's something that's negative that pops up, that always leads to rights being taken away or to some sort of devastating event like war or whatever the deal is. And if it's always there whenever it pops up for these things, for what's happening, and it's always associated with something that is undesirable by the vast majority of the planet and whatnot, maybe not the handful of people that want the war at the very top, but for the general people for what's going on, then you know in that instance that that's the case for that. Now, I'm not saying this gives us the answers to everything, but it does make it so that way it tells us what we should be doing in certain instances and should not be doing in certain instances. And we can pull from the collective wisdom of humanity and our written records as well, stuff that's just archaeological finds that help back up that kind of thing that goes back for however long we can trace that stuff to and whatnot. This is what I search for in what I'm doing and my research that's going on there. The lessons that can be learned that show up over and over and over again that are timeless.
Key is perfect for that.
Yeah, lessons are important. It's how the soul grows. It's how we experience things.
That's also why we keep making the same mistakes over again, both individually and collectively, because we don't take the lessons and truly understand the deeper meanings behind them to the fullest extent that there is.
It's deep. We've gone deep already. We're not that far.
That is deep. It's like mind blown.
All I know, am I sitting there processing? I'm still kind of laughing too, because I'm thinking of like little 6-year-old Nathaniel just going like, screw all you adults. No, none of you know what you're doing around here. I'm just going to figure it out on my own. Just like out. I love it.
And the wisdom of children.
Yeah.
Well, I guess before we get too far away from it, the three phases that Thor mentions for any of our viewers or listeners that are currently there that don't understand exactly that fully, do you mind going over that real quick to kind of recap?
Sure. The basic one is that you kind of just start off with trusting whatever somebody else says that's the authority and that kind of thing with it. And then you eventually you get to the next phase, which is that you start questioning things with it and you realize that there's something deeper to these stories, but then it kind of makes you question whether there's any spirituality whatsoever and that kind of thing with it, because it's like these are just like archetypes or they're just symbolic of other things like, say, certain weather conditions or certain patterns in nature or whatever the deal is with that. And then eventually, with Thor's model that he lays out, there's the third one, which is that you go back and realizing that, well, number one is not necessarily true. You need to do your own journey in order to figure this stuff out for yourself. And number two, also doesn't go deep enough for what's happening, that there's a third level, which is the combination of spirituality and being in the real world at the same time for what's going on there, and that they're not separate from one another. that they are intermingled and interlinked completely.
Perfect. Perfect. That's definitely a good way to, sum it up. With that being said, then, what would you say is your practice? Since obviously you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into a certain faith, religion, or spirituality per se, but in your practice, in your reverence or your own personal style, what would you say would be the closest to?
So there's a handful of things. Meditation or uttaseta or whatever you want to call it, from different traditions is a big part of it for me. But that's not my main one, I would say. And you all know what my main one is, of course. It's not even blatantly obvious from the beginning and whatnot. My spiritual practice is the reading of the various different texts, going and deeply studying them at such a level that I'm trying to understand myself and the world around me, and making it so that way I align myself with the facts that are presented to me, and I can consistently change my worldview as new understandings unfold within me and insights come from it. And it's a type of spiritual purification of eradicating anything that should not be there, anything that is not based upon reality. So if I don't see the key that's positive that I want in order to manifest or what it is for that, and I only see the negative key inside of me, some sort of wound that needs to be healed, an internal wound, then I have to work on actively removing that wound and overcoming it so I don't pass that on to anybody else and make the world a worse place. Alternatively, if I see that there's something that I can add, which is generally not the case, where and it's not to toot my own horn there. I find it's much more often for the vast majority of people, we need to stop doing certain things rather than adding certain things to what's going on there due to the wounds that we have. That, with the good key example, and it's popping up over and over again for when things are going right, then I change that for what's happening. So in other words, I make it so that way I align myself as much as possible to truth, and as well as what I can perceive it. You have a straight line and this represents truth. And then you have waves that go like this. The wider the wave is, the less it hits the line of truth, so to speak. And so that means that that's the perception. The mine is to make it so it goes like this so many times with so many things that I've done with it that I am in complete alignment with truth. That my waveform and my perception is so good, so clear that I just do that. And I make it so that way I have my thoughts, my emotions, and my actions, aka being in total integrity with myself, in order to make it so that way I go and just stay as straight and narrow to that line as possible and don't allow myself to stray from it once I have a true deep understanding of what I should be doing and what I should not be doing based upon the consequences of my choices or lack thereof.
Being responsible with your consciousness and your choices. I like that.
This process is about taking total responsibility for yourself and realizing that you can't have anybody else. There's no such thing as external authority. It doesn't exist. That's the bottom line. Because every time that you want to say that, oh, I'm trusting this person or this representative or whatever that you're doing with it for you, you have made that choice yourself to give up your own power. You still made that choice. But no matter what, you're still responsible for your action, for what your thoughts are and what's going on there. You can't escape the consequences of that. There's no way around it because you still made a choice and you can take that choice back at any point in time for it. Just most people, unfortunately, decide to continue to give more and more of their own thoughts up. And they also have a lot of thoughts that they think that are theirs that aren't theirs in any way, shape, or form. Hence that removal of the negative stuff that isn't actually there either, to make it so that way you can get to your true core essence for what's happening. Rather than making it so that way you need to add more. It's mostly about removing a bunch of nonsense is what I have found.
I need to
Jung calls this the shadow work, just as one version of it.
yeah, that's what the popular term is in all the witchy communities. I need to take what you just said there, that clip, and just give that to my Moon key students because that's one of the lessons actually.
And enlightenment is ultimately a destructive process.
Yeah.
I wanted Carlos story that I think will illustrate it the best. It'll be a very brief one for what's going on with it. you have Raphael who's going there every day, and he is staring at this marble slab that's in front of him. And he comes in and stares at it for hours and hours and hours, and he doesn't do anything with it. And then eventually he walks away from that, and he keeps coming back over and over and over again. And one of his attendants that's there says, "Maestro, what are you doing?" He says, "I'm working." Eventually that became what we know today as the statue of David. Because what he did is he kept going in there and chipping away everything that was not supposed to be part of that statue in his mind first before he ever took up the chisel and the hammer to start carving it to what he wanted it to be. That's what he was doing. The same exact process. It's exactly the same process. It's about a removal of anything that you're not supposed to have there in order to reveal what's already there that you do want and what you have.
You're in the realm of the Stoics at this point. Yeah, you're sounding a lot like Epictetus and Aurelius. Yeah, but I figured they went without saying.
It's a big part of that's the Socratic method, that Socrates did with this questioning things or what was going on with it. That's what it is as well. When you start asking the right questions, suddenly things start changing your perspective on stuff or what's going on. The secret to how our world is built on this particular front, since we're on this topic very briefly, I have an entire podcast that's dedicated to this on my own personal podcast for anybody who is wanting to know more on this particular topic. But the very short version of it is that you start with collecting as much data as possible. Okay? You don't prejudge the data. You just grab it. This could be any form of information that you're getting. It doesn't matter. It could be from your own physical body and what it's telling you. It could be from reading it somewhere. It could be my voice. It could be anything. It makes no difference. It's just any sort of information that's coming in or lack thereof. That's the other point for this too, or lack thereof. And the next stage is to process that information to make it so that way you put everything that has to do with whatever you're looking for in one category over here. Let's say it has to do with, Norse mythology. Great. Everything you've collected in Norse mythology goes into this box over here, so to speak, for what's going on. Anything that doesn't goes in somewhere else. So you aggregate it into how you want to do with it and process the information. You also start weeding out for contradictions. You start weeding out for any logical inconsistencies, whatever, on that particular point, or lack thereof, meaning your incapability of doing so. And then finally, you get to the third stage, which is the output stage, to make it so that way you can have that information readily available to you and it makes your decisions for you. And then you times this by 8 billion people on the planet or whatever it is that there are now, and you get how our society and our planet is made. This is why the first stage, the input stage, if you will, if you want to use modern computing stuff, input, processing, output, the input stage is always targeted first. We call it censorship. This is why every tyrant or every would-be tyrant and dictator censors stuff, because if you make it so that way you need to have this amount of information here and you censor it to here to what you're allowed to have, you've already predetermined the outcome from the very beginning. And they know that, and that's why they do that. Hence why I added or lack thereof at every stage.
Yeah, I mean that's why this whole culture and this philosophy of the past isn't part of modern education. History of our actual world and the cultures that everyone essentially came from, which were more similar the further you go back. Yeah, there's a reason why that's not represented, because it justifies the idea of unity. Just not It's not easy to get people to fight in wars when they feel unified.
Yeah, it's very difficult to make it so that way that's the case. That you can only make that work if there's division of some sort. And the only way you can make wars happen is if people agree to listen to some sort of small group of mad, meaning insane individuals of some sort with it. And in my opinion, this is what the biggest issue is that the biggest issue is that people, again, believe that they can outsource their thinking, outsource their actions and the consequences for those actions to other people and be insulated from what happens there. The cult of ultimate evil, if you want to go there on that particular front with it, are order followers who don't follow their own conscience or don't have a conscience. And that's what it boils down to. This is how every dictator rules. Otherwise, they're just madmen saying nonsense. You think Hitler could come to power the way he did if people didn't follow him? Stalin, Mao, any of these people in the 20th century, just as an example, Pol Pot? No. Their power was in the fact that people decided to follow the chain of command and never questioned it in any way, shape, or form, or at least not enough of them did. And so we get the result that we have for that. And we're going to continue to get that same result over and over again until we as a species decide to take back our power and to make it so that way we have responsibility for ourselves and don't allow anybody to make decisions for us. Only we are and what our consciousness dictates.
Well, the issue with that is that we live in a society now where technology has brought us out into a different era of existence, to where our authoritarian leaders, our elitist leaders, those who actually are responsible for thought manipulation and the agenda, the narrative, they have basically created a society of dependence based on technology, which then they have the keys to at that point. It's a whole thing of create the issue to provide the solution, which is essentially what's happening now. Even with everything.
Hegelian dialectic, yes.
Yes. I mean, unfortunately, it's not at a point where we can just go off into the wilderness and then establish ourselves like Daniel Boone, and decide.
I'm not even saying that that's even infinitely desirable in any way, shape, or form, but we, at least here in America, still have a modicum of free speech, and perhaps we'll have to see what happens here with the new political landscape. Don't know what'll happen, but we might even be able to get more and more of it back and maintain it. And the point is that we need to exercise that particular thing way more and start doing it. Hence why I'm doing my own personal podcast, hence why I'm part of this podcast for what's going on there, because the only thing I can do is make it so that people who are trying to seek out this type of information, they can find it, that they can actually have access to it. I can't control what other people think. I can't control what other people do. I don't want to play God in that particular regard, but I can make it so that way people who do want to better themselves, that do want to take responsibility, or that are curious for this information, that they can have access to it. Unlike making it so that way it's completely hidden away and that they can't do it in any way, shape, or form. That's my role in this. It's the only thing I can do on a moral level other than taking it to the next stage, which is self-defense if it comes to that, which we're not there yet, but we're incrementally, going through that way through the totalitarian tiptoe, that it might have to come to the forefront, unfortunately. But this is the only peaceful solution that there is having more people standing up for the right for free speech, not allowing it to die out in any way, shape, or form. If this goes, Western civilization and any semblance of freedom that we still have left dies permanently. We will never see it again. And if we do, it'll be hundreds, if not thousands of years later that we get access to this again, in my estimation, because of the technology that we have. This is the unique opportunity that we have. We are in an all or nothing struggle right now. Either we succumb to what's going on because of the technological stuff that you're talking about, or we can use that technology to make it so that way we free ourselves. Because it's the internet makes it so that way it's an all or nothing exercise now. They don't have a choice about that. It's built into the earth. The wires are everywhere. They would literally have to destroy most of the earth, if not the entire planet, in order to get rid of it. And now with Starlink and that kind of stuff, makes it even harder to get rid of completely. And then that kind of stuff, because now you have to get rid of those, low orbiting satellites as well. This is what has to happen. It's an all or nothing exercise for freedom or tyranny. And people need to care more and step up to the plate more on this front. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's also why I spent the last 14 years plus deeply researching stuff to make it so that way when I am presenting information to people, that in good conscience, I am not leading them astray in any way, shape, or form. And I'm doing the very best that I can to provide the best unadulterated information.
So if I may then, I guess the Nathaniel that we see today hasn't strayed too far from that 6-year-old Nathaniel back before. It's just
Just got a weird.
right. Rather than being, I guess, allowed to governed mentally and spiritually by those before you, you're kind of taking those tools and giving them to the next generations or those that are seeking new information, say here for your other personal channel, whatnot, giving them the ability to educate themselves, take what applies to them or what information is given through these channels, and then in turn create their own self awareness, self spirituality, and whatnot.
Yeah, they need to be able to reflect on things for what's going on that particular front. No one can. I wish it was as simple as me just taking all the information that I have in my head and just literally touching someone on the shoulder or whatever, or on their forehead and passing that information on to them. But if that were the case for it, we already would have been all enlightened for what was going on and not harming each other in any way, shape, or form from whatever the first being that figured that out was, however long ago that was. And then they would have just kept passing it onward. But that's not how this works. Everybody has to take their own quest to do this, so to speak. There's nothing that can be done with it. That's what the hero's journey is about. That's what the initiate's journey is about. The hero is just the external manifestation of it. The initiates is just the internal manifestation of it. They're the same thing. There is no difference between the two in any way, shape, or form. It's just how the story is told.
So, with that, then, say in a perfect world, or Nathaniel's perfect world, anyways, if you could change one thing, obviously we wouldn't just touch each other and pass full information, full knowledge, or anything like that. If you can give, I guess, if you could change something or give to the masses something, maybe nuggets of information that you picked up along the way, or something that you'd like to see, what would that be?
It would be the fact that people don't even understand what a right is. You can go and ask anybody on the street corner. You can go interview as many people as you want. No one can give you a definitive answer for what a right is. If you don't know what a right is, you don't know what a wrong is either. You don't know what you're not supposed to be doing. And therefore, you can be manipulated into thinking that something that you think is right is wrong, and something that you think is wrong is right. And you can also make it so that way you can't defend your rights in any way, shape, or form. And this is why we have a debate about everything that's going on in the world and all these various different topics and all these various different things, because nobody understands first principles. Nobody understands this basic information that should be straightforward for everybody to get and whatnot. This is we've been arguing about this shit for thousands upon thousands of years because nobody has figured out what that is. I've yet asked thousands of people the same question over my lifetime, and I've yet to find one single individual, one that I've spoken to, that can give me the definitive answer for what that is, the right answer. And there is a right answer to it, and that kind of thing. I've heard many people give that it comes from God as an example. Great, you told me where it came from. You didn't tell me what it is, though. That's the thing that we all need to figure out and get on the same page about. We start doing that, and everybody starts actually following what that is. You're going to wake up on a planet overnight that nobody can understand in comparison to what we have now. It's not going to be a utopia. That's not what I'm talking about. It's just going to be there's no self-inflicted suffering anymore that we do to each other as a species. There's still going to be plenty of problems that we have to deal with. I'm not naive in thinking that we can achieve something that's impossible to achieve. It's never going to happen. I want to make it so that way we stop doing the bullshit that we shouldn't have to do anymore to ourselves and to each other. That would be my short answer to that. I can elaborate a lot more on this, but yeah.
Well, with that being said, obviously that makes a lot of sense, that education on their part, understanding our rights, understanding each other, really. But when it gets to that, I guess, that little nugget of information to pass on to them, how do you think they could maybe ease that quest for themselves? Is there a certain way that you may have come to these revelations, or maybe something that you've done along your path that have helped you find these things or come closer to them?
Sure, it was that key thing that I gave earlier. If we know definitively that something is anti-life, such as the belief in going around and killing everybody around you and that kind of stuff with it, we can also just reason some of this out for other things with it. You can't have a civilization that's going to work for itself in any way, shape, or form if everybody believes that stealing from somebody else is okay. It's just not going to work. You can't have that. And so this is why it's so easy to figure out exactly what to do. It's based upon what not to do. hence why I said it's getting rid of that stuff to begin with. If you know what not to do, don't do these things, then the rest of it becomes very clear for what's going on. And so, you know, if you look at it, everything that it comes down to is that there's one rule. There is one rule that has many permutations, but there is one rule in humanity that we need to follow. Don't fucking steal, period. That's it. Murder is the taking of a life that does not belong to you. Rape is the taking of somebody's free will choice of who they sexually associate with, a form of theft. Theft is theft for what's going on. Coercion is, or putting someone underneath duress, same difference, is making it so that way you threaten them with violence unless they do what you want them to do with it. It's taking away their free will choice in that particular regard. Trespass is making it so that way someone in their dwelling space for what it is or something that belongs to them, you go in and you're uninvited to it. And so if you start going down the list of all these things and then whatnot, it all comes down to a form of theft in some form or another. Period. End of discussion. But we're too stupid as a species to figure this one lesson that we're supposed to have with it. Everywhere around me in the world, all I see is various different forms of theft that are going on with it, because people unfortunately, they haven't gotten rid of the many tyrants and the many thinking that the tyrants have inside of their own heads, and making it so that way they think that they should rule over or that they could do it better and whatnot. That's the whole point of the Lord of the Rings series, is to make it so that way you go and you get rid of the one ring. That makes it so that way you get rid of the ring of power. I mean, nobody wants to control it. Everybody failed that test except one character. There's only one character that didn't fail that test, and that was Gimli the dwarf, who immediately, upon seeing, oh, the ring needs to be destroyed, great, goes and tries to destroy it with his axe. Obviously, ultimately failed because that's not how it could be destroyed. But he's the only one that definitively passed the test the moment that it showed up for him. He did it. Boom. Nope, it needs to go away. Great, let's get rid of it. He's the only one that had any sense of true morality inside of him, inside of the stories that Tolkien wrote and whatnot. That's what happens. But we as a species still want to have power and control and influence over other people. That's what it boils down to, unfortunately. We all have these tendencies for mini tyranny and whatnot, and until we eradicate that particular virus inside of ourselves with it, we're going to continue to do the same shit over and over again, has been proven throughout history time and time again for it. And by the way, on that particular front for it, anybody who thinks that that's inevitable or that's natural for us, I challenge them on this particular front with it. We've existed for 300,000 years as a species, according to the archaeological record. It's only been in the last 8,000 years that we've had any form of government and the belief of authority outside of ourselves that we should follow in that particular regard. Okay? So what's our nature? Something that we do less than 3% of the time, or something that we do 90 some odd percent of the time? Which one's truly who we are as a species, and which one's been contrived by certain conditions that we fall underneath?
I can tell you're really passionate about this, Nathaniel. I'm curious, what would you recommend for somebody who wants to to learn to think for themselves, or if someone who's starting their path, what advice would you give them to find, to find what is right, I guess.
Well, it comes back down to that self-integrity thing that I briefly spoke about for what was going on. Our thoughts, emotions, and actions need to be in alignment for what it is. If you have, or there's a conflict between something that you know that you should be doing or want to be doing or whatever it is, and you have the desire to do it, and there's something that gets in the way, whatever that is, and you're not taking action on it, it's something that you still have not figured out for yourself, and that you need to deep dive on a personal level in some capacity or another on that particular front with it. What that is, I cannot say. It's going to be different for each individual for what they have to work through based on their particular background and whatnot. So you have that particular aspect of it. And unfortunately, a lot of us have trauma from childhood that pops up with that. An example from this could be a dad beating his wife or whatever, that's beating the mom of a child and that kind of stuff. And then when the child sees it, they have two options that they can make unconsciously. I'll go into why this is important in a moment for what it is. So you can either choose to be the aggressor, the one that does the perpetuating the violence and whatnot. Child has that option, or they have the option to be the one that doesn't do violence but is taking out on. Either way, the unconscious choice that that child makes perpetuates the cycle forward, because one makes it so that way you become a victim, and the other one makes it so that way you become the person who dishes it out onto the people for it. The child at that stage does not see that there's a third option, which is only something you can do once you have a certain level of sophisticated mind in order to sort certain things out with it when you become an adult. It's not the child's fault, it's just the way that it works. But it is that person's fault when they become an adult not to go and work on it and fix that part of them that there was for whatever side that they chose that continues to make that happen. That's what the issue is. Most of us aren't doing the shadow work. Most of us aren't looking in the mirror. Most of us aren't actually actively trying to change themselves and whatnot. You want to make the world a better place? Great. Start with yourself. That's the problem. Too many people want the world to change. Perfect. You want it to change. Are you willing to change yourself in order to make that happen? Suddenly, almost nobody wants to do that anymore.
If I could comment, that's really interesting, because I was just reading today in one of my Druid training novels, books, whatever, is that they talk about the concept of three rays of light. And essentially, outside the names of each one of them, the old Irish names, it's knowledge, power, and peace, right? And it's like knowledge and power exist here, but then it's all the harmony in the middle, and this harmony within the middle. That's what peace is. This harmony, right? And they were talking about how, especially with the way that we're actually, this society that we're talking about, the way it's structured, it's operating in this binary concept where it's either you're this or you're this. But the whole concept of Druidical practice is the third option, which is either the middle point or the completely outside of everything. They say the triangle is the most powerful form of support or shape or whatever, right? But it's because there's 3 points to everything, not a bilinear system.
We live in a three-dimensional universe, first off. So that means you have to have it to where there is 3 dimensions for what it is. What you and me, as an example, or anybody else here for that, you're going to have a false relationship if you are not both also trying to seek truth. That's the third part that aligns everything with it. We might disagree on what that truth is, which is fine. We can have a discussion about that kind of stuff for what it is. But if one party's going there and the other one's not even interested in it, it's going to collapse. It's a false relationship. It's never going to work out. It'll always fall flat on it whenever shit hits the fan or whatever the deal is. This is not a real thing. That's why it's always 3. That's also why behind me you've got the balance right here for that with the heart and the feather of truth and whatnot, with the nubis and the scales that are happening. That's part of that. You also have, the 3 different pathways in Kabbalah that need to be done with it that are that part of it too. And then in the Buddhist story, you also have where, one variant has it's where he's hearing someone play the sitar, a stringed instrument in India. And that, if it's too loose, it won't play properly. If it's too tight, it'll break through the middle way that goes with it. And that's the same thing that Buddha is talking about there for what's happening too, is that it has to be in balance. Every tradition has something like this.
Yeah, they do. They always have the 3. They always have the observance in the center and observing, the upper and middle worlds, and so to speak, or different dimensions, and different wavelengths. And I've been finding that personally on a lot of my studies. It always comes down to that 3. Always. It's crazy.
What's also interesting is that it's what Nikola Tesla had said about 3, is that if you understood the truth behind 3, 6, and 9, this is in reference to, there you go, she's getting it. Yeah, there you go.
I have that one. I bought that book for my husband. He loves Nikola Tesla. Sorry, ADD moment.
He talks about the infinite source of energy that exists in the cosmos. I'm doing a poor translation here, but he said that if you understood basically the power of 3, 6, 9, which is 3 in itself, right, then you would actually understand the full possibility
He was talking
of
about
our universe.
frequencies in the universe. Yeah, he would understand. He said if you come to it, that you'd understand the totality of the universe or what is going on and its meaning and its deeper meaning.
And a completion of it all, the completeness of the self. Do that too.
Oh,
I did not know that. Sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just going to ask, like, do you have a community of like-minded people like yourself that just get together and kind of like talk about these deeper things in life and what you've read and what you've learned?
No, would be the short answer to that. But that doesn't mean that they don't exist and they're not out there. That's part of the reason why I'm doing the podcast now and switching over to video stuff and whatnot on YouTube and that kind of stuff in order to try to start actually having my own community, if you will, and that kind of stuff with it to have more of that input and sight with it. I have some friends that are kind of similar minded and thinking on certain things for what's going on with that, but that, it's not like a true community that's meeting up all the time to talk or discuss things with it. Absolutely. I want something more akin to that, since we're on that topic, I'll just be very brief with this, but it doesn't really matter what side of the equation is. It could be good, it could be for bad, it could be for just neutral purposes or whatever the deal is. It's only ever been a small group of people who have ever changed the world for what's happening. I'll give some very brief examples. You have 56 people who signed the Declaration of Independence that started the American Revolution here by doing that act. You had 55 people who started the National Socialist Party in Germany. You have 300 people that started the Bolshevik Revolution inside of Russia that created that for what it is. You have 20 people that were inside of a pub inside the UK that started to make it so that way they wanted to end slavery worldwide. And, British Empire at the time period had a huge influence because it was all over the world. So that was very key and paramount for helping that idea come to fruition for what's going on. Joan of Arc ended up making it so she ended the 100 Years' War because of her actions, not while she was alive, a little later on, though. But it only started with her and a few knights that believed in her story, that she was going to be the savior of France and make that happen. And eventually got some other people like the Dauphin and some other ones to believe in her for what it is. And so the list goes on and on and on for all this throughout history. So anybody who wants to tell you that a small group of people can't change the world, they're absolutely fucking lying to you. Absolutely, for what's going on with it. It has only ever been a small group of people that are dedicated to what they want to do that changes the world. That's the key part. They have to believe in what they're doing and go after it wholeheartedly and whatnot. Doesn't mean they're guaranteed to make it happen, but it's the only formula that actually does work.
Well, I don't mean to be overly ambitious or anything, but we're not a very large group, 5 of us.
It's very true. How many Rothschilds are there? How many people are in the Bilderberg group? How many people go to the Bohemian Grove? It's not
Right.
large groups of people.
No.
And just as we
Especially not
about the
compared to the 8 billion people that there are on the planet, right? So,
yeah, I mean, you can see it. You can see it not just in the good in the world, but you can see how effective it is to be used in evil. It's an effective procedure. It's just there's people out there that don't always use it for the good of mankind.
no, that's what it is. The universe doesn't care one way or another for what it is. It doesn't care whether good triumphs of the way that we understand it or, order, let's say, and then or chaos does in evil, whatever term you want to put on it for those other things. I don't care for what it is. It only cares about whether you understand the principles that there are and how to build the world around you and if you can effectively do it or not. That's all it cares about. And if you can, great, it gives you what you want. And if you can't, great, doesn't care. It's completely neutral on this particular front for it, and it has to be. And the reason why it has to be is that the only way you can truly learn is to make it so that way you're here, you do this, you come to this place that we call Earth, and then you have to experiment and to figure out what works and what doesn't work. That's it. The only way to do that is through experimentation. You can't choose sides with it. It's like having someone that loves you so much that they're like, you know what, I'm going to let you do whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter if it harms yourself or whatever the deal is, because I love you enough to let you go, to let you figure it out. And it doesn't matter if it's unwise. You can keep doing it for as long as you want. But eventually, you're going to have to suffer the consequences of what you've done. And you can't escape those consequences for what it is. But it doesn't mean that we're getting exactly what we deserve. The system isn't broken. It's exactly what we deserve as humanity. Because we are too stupid to figure out not to steal from each other in all of its various different forms. Great. Until we learn that, we're just going to have to keep getting hammered by the same lessons over and over again.
I think it's I forget who said it, but I think it was God said that when you know what love is, you won't even need me.
Yeah. Well, there's a story in the Hindu tradition and whatnot. Maybe it's from other versions of it, but I heard it first from the Hindu tradition and that kind of stuff. And their variant of it was the following: that you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, or you have a lesson you need to be learned with it. So first, God whispers in your ear, then he taps you on the shoulder, blah blah blah. It goes all the way up until he drops a goddamn house on you. That's how it works. You keep going through the same thing, and it's going to keep building up and keep building up and keep getting worse until you either learn from it or you completely perish. And there is no in between for what's going on. And that's why things have continued to build up and build up and build up to where they are right now. It's because we keep making the same mistakes over and over and over. And the toys that we've created, the technology that you're talking about earlier, keep getting more and more sophisticated and that kind of stuff. And we call it progress. Well, yeah, great. We progressed externally. Congratulations. But morally, as a species, we have barely changed at all.
I want to ask, maybe as we're getting close to the end of the hour, but I want to ask, what would you say to the Norse pagans of your community when it comes to being a part of this culture, religion, practice, all of that? Like, what kind of message do you have for people up there?
That people have too much focus on external things still. That it's not about rites or rituals, that it's not to say that they can't be useful. I view them as like permission slips for the mind in order to make it so that way you can have a certain understanding or level of understanding that goes along with it, but that there are deeper meanings behind all of these things with it. Those are the 3 stages that Thor was talking about before on his episode that he was doing with stuff. And that too many people are focused too much on the exoteric side of this particular stuff with it. And, they're just doing the same stuff that other traditions have always done with it. And this is true of all traditions and all religions with it, that ultimately the whole point is to understand that the gods represent certain things that are in nature or ourselves. And ultimately we're part of nature. So it's still part of ourselves, no matter how you look at it. And to make it so that way, by understanding these stories that you're reading, in this case, the Nordic/Germanic ones, making it so that way you truly go and deep dive them for yourselves and extract the lessons that are there, that are deeper and hidden within them and whatnot. That would be the ultimate thing to do there with it. Every single group of people had their mystery religion, if you will, their mystery tradition that was inside of it, that was hidden behind the exoteric part of that. It's not anything different for the Nordic tradition. Even the stuff that survives that we have, it's very clear that they had that for part of it and whatnot. And too many people get caught up on things that aren't necessarily important. That's why at the Oracle of Delphi, as an example, it said to know thyself, but it also said to know it about the gods and whatnot. The gods are the same as us. They represent aspects of ourselves, is what it is. Doesn't mean they don't exist as part of it, external to it. I mean, that's the whole story of Otter, as an example. When Otter goes and does his ritual that he does and gives blood onto the stone and whatnot that turns to crystal, and then Freya, the goddess Freya, rides him like a boar down into the Norse underworld called Hell. You have an entire thing that's there with it. And in that story, it shows, and this is important because it shows on this particular part for it too, that it's a universal thing. It's not just for one particular group either for what's happening, that the entirety of all creation he is descended from. The giants, the dwarves, everything. It doesn't matter. The gods themselves, the various ones, different people, different groups of people, all of it. They all are that you're a descendant of that otter of the little mind and whatnot. In other words, his mind was so tiny at that stage of things. It was such an egoic form that he was focusing on all the wrong things for what's happening. It's even in the traditions there in itself, and then Poetic Edda, when you start really reading and getting down and deep diving into it. That's what people don't seem to understand. It doesn't mean you can't do the rituals. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm not saying you don't do them. I'm saying that those are only a part of what's going on here.
Can I read a poem that I think that I've been thinking about this entire time? It's very short.
If you want to, I don't care.
I-
Sure, go ahead.
Um, it's called
What's it-
Laughing
the-
Heart.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, go. No, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just going to ask what it was called, but you were already. So,
Yeah. It's called The Laughing Heart, and it goes, "Your life is your life. Don't let it be clubbed into dank submission. Be on the watch. There are ways out. There is a light somewhere. It may not be much light. It beats the darkness, though. Be on the watch. The gods will offer you chances. Know them, take them. You can't beat death, but you can beat death in life sometimes. And the more often you learn to do it, the more light there will be. Your life is your life. Know it while you have it. You are marvelous. The gods wait to delight in you." That's by Charles Bukowski. This entire time that I've been talking to you, I've been thinking about that poem this entire time, because for me, what it feels like what you're saying is that we are essentially a part of all things. We all are a part of each other, and the gods are us. The earth is us. Everything that we do somehow finds a way to come back onto us and affect us in some way. You know, what you do to other people, you actually do to yourself. I mean, that's essentially what I'm gathering from this.
yeah, that's the Haminya or the karmic stuff for people who are more noticeable about that, which Western tradition, obviously, because they're going to understand that better. It's the same thing, though. It's if you take the origins of that word, the etymological roots, this is not from me. This is from scholars who know much better than I will about this in terms of the words for it. It probably comes from hangenya, to walk in shapes. So you're starting off from the smallest amoeba life thing, let's say, and then working your way up into various different shapes and forms and all of that, and until you get to the level of humanity or beyond. And at each iteration of incarnation that you get with it, you can keep moving forward and moving forward and moving forward on that particular front of things with that. And the whole point is to have collective, enough collective hangenya to make it so that way you and your tribe and your group of people and whatnot, they reach a certain level of spiritual enlightenment for what it is. And Snorri Sturluson's stuff, which you have to take with a grain of salt because he is not pagan, obviously, although he seems to be sympathetic to the pagan stuff for what was going on. He wrote what he could and what was allowed to write, because you have to imagine the following scenario. You have the church looking over your shoulder at everything that you're doing all the time for it. So he couldn't write everything down, but he put in there what he could be doing with it and whatnot. We owe a lot to Snorri, and we would not even be able to understand the vast majority of the stuff that's going on. We would probably still be 100 years behind at this point. Like, go back 100 years, and that would be understanding of Norse paganism and whatnot. And anyway, point is that there are 9 realms in which hell rules over, the goddess Hel. 9. But there are other realms that do exist. So there are realms that don't have any death inside of them, that don't make that happen. And that's where the light elves go eventually, the illuminated versions of our ancestors that are ultimately left up to the highest levels and whatnot. That is one particular aspect that could be looked at in that particular way for what it is. The notion of enlightenment being only an Eastern tradition is flat out false. It was a universal tradition at one point, that we were all aspiring to be that, at least for the Proto-Indo-European stuff. And even for stuff that wasn't, you can see this with the Egyptian stuff, where the whole point of them was to become these star-like beings and whatnot that are fully illuminated and whatnot. You know, the pharaoh was the one that usually took that journey for his people, but it doesn't mean that other people couldn't achieve it either. So clearly it's not just a Proto-Indo-European, because the Egyptians weren't part of the Indo-European groups. You see this with Sumeria and other places too. It's universal. That's the point.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think Lucifer's name means?
Yeah, the light bearer.
Yeah, the illuminated one. Yeah.
Most people don't know this, but one of the interpretations for, since you're on that, I'm not going to get into a long thing with it, I promise, but that for Lucifer, for why the war in heaven happened, so to speak, is to make it so that way he refused to bow down to anybody but God. That's not what the issue was, is that when humanity was created, he refused to bow down to humanity because that's how much he loved and worshiped the divine creator, what we might call the almighty in the Norse tradition and whatnot. He would refuse to bow down to anything but that. And that is what led to the war in heaven in one of the traditions that there is that they don't teach you in Sunday school and that kind of thing, because it had nothing to do with him wanting to be egomaniac and try to replace God. It doesn't fit that notion. Just another interpretation of him.
Yeah, same with Sauron. Not to undermine what you're saying, but I mean, you do see how all these myths and legends get echoed through eternity, through new stories and
Oh yeah,
new.
Tolkien was a master about that. I mean, that's why he spent forever building it, because he knew that he wanted to get it right for. I mean, it's quite clear he took it from Nordic stuff. I mean, one of the dwarves' name is Gandalf in it, for goodness sake, that we get from that. And then, if you look at what Gandalf's wearing, it's basically one of the disguises of Odin for what's happening. And of course, people who've studied Tolkien all know that. Not even a question for what happened, but yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Tolkien actually said that the Celtic and Norse cultures are boxes you can put anything into and take anything out of.
Sounds about right. Any other questions that you guys want to get into?
Honestly, we're at about an hour, and I think if we get into a little bit more questions, because we can go on and on, I'm sure. I know I have a 1,000 more questions that I'm sure I can ask, and if anybody else wants to jump in, if not, I'll just close it out. All right.
I'm gonna have weird dreams tonight. I can say that. My brain's gonna be processing all this. So I'm on very little sleep and it's late for me. So I'm gonna have weird dreams tonight. I'm texting you tomorrow, Nathaniel.
Yeah, I don't know if you could tell. I don't know if you can tell, Nathaniel. I would sit here and just go one on one with this stuff. Like if it was the morning and I had my fresh cup of coffee, we'd be going till second breakfast. All right.
Oh my gosh, I heart that.
Well, I mean, if there's enough desire from the general public for that, we can totally do something like that at some point. I don't care.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's,
Go for it.
That's actually a good idea.
That'd be fun.
Maybe Nathaniel, the other the things that my students are working on, maybe it's just that, like a round table, like they just come there and be like, all right, throw anything at you. I'd be very interested in that actually. Should have like just a big public thing, like we'll just hold you open on Zoom and be like, come ask a question.
Yeah. That could be a series that you can have on your podcast or something even.
Yeah.
That was kind of the plan at some point, and I need to get more technologically savvy and set some other stuff up here I need to in the room and whatnot first. But yeah, eventually that's
Nice.
something I would do. Anyway, Drew, if you had a question, I believe, or something else that you wanted to say to close out.
No, I actually was lost topic just a little bit. If we have no more questions, I think we'll end it here just so everybody can get our rest. And yeah, I think we should definitely revisit this whole one-on-one sort of thing again. I know we haven't even got through everyone yet, and already there's so much more with just this little introduction to each of us. So yeah, I got a lot of stuff out of this. I got a lot more that I could have said, but I guess we'll have to wait till next time, and that works for me as long as it works for all of you. Until next time, we'll see you again. I don't necessarily know. We got to work on that, but yeah. Until next time, this is the Uzlaga Saga.